Chloe, thank you so much. Uh, Good afternoon to everyone. Afternoon UK time. I see that some of you are joining us as alumni from around the world. Wonderful to have you as part of today's summer walk, virtual walk around Cruickshank Botanic Garden. What has been pulled up immediately for you to look at is the map of the gardens. This is a map that some of you will have seen before, and it was created by my colleagues in the university graphics team, Uniprint. When I first arrived, I inherited a map that wasn't of this caliber. This map is, I believe, much easier to use, easier to see the main features of the garden. And while there is not a scale, and that is deliberate, there is certainly a key advertising showcasing the major features of this 11-acre, 4.5 hectare botanic property. We will today be exploring some of this garden, but we will certainly be moving through the main we will be moving through all of the garden. I talk about it being in thirds, and so we will move through each, where you see numbers 1, 2 through to 5. 10 is an anomaly in this instance. That's the southern section. Number 6 with the blue ponds is the central 2/3 central lawn and ponds garden, and then we finish up where you're seeing numbers 7, 8, 9. That's the Arboretum, and we'll have a brief view there as well. The map is, as you can see, is left to right, south to north, and you'll see St Maca Drive on the far left side, the dividing road really between the northern heart of the campus. You will remember this as students of past years, and the southern section, the main King's campus itself. Without further ado, let's move straight into the garden itself. We will be in the courtyard area of the Cruickshank building and 23 St Maca Drive building, sometimes known as the Orris building. As we pivot around in a moment, we'll see a cherry tree that has very recently been pruned. More than that, it's been cut back heavily. I'll explain what needs to be done to that tree in a moment and why we've done what we've done. You're looking there at the courtyard entrance into the Cruickshank building. If we can just stop there, you'll see this cherry tree looking very unhappy. The tree is approximately 50 years old. It was a Japanese cultivar. Very sad to have had it pruned back as hard as has presently been done, and in due course we'll actually be taking it down to ground level. The cherry belongs to the plant family Rosaceae, the rose family, and there is a disease that originated in North America, in fact in Canada, southern Ontario, that came across to Europe and then Britain, as I understand it, in the 1970s. It's called Blight, and it impacts woody plants of the Rosaceae family. Cherries are slightly less susceptible, but tragically it can have a major impact on commercial fruit growing trees of that family. We're talking about pears, plums, peaches, nectarines, but also ornamental plants of the family, crab apples, crataegus, hawthorn, the list goes on. Tragically, over the last 4-5 years now, we have noted that we have blight moving through some of our collection. It is bacterial, it spreads on the wind, but it can also be spread by pollinators for up to 24 hours. With the insects moving from flower to flower, it spreads when the tree is in flower. It's very difficult to manage and control in any purposeful way, and when a shrub is infected, the only long-term solution is to remove it, burn the dead tissue, the dead plant material, to try and eradicate the disease from the collection. Tragically, this cherry has been impacted. The work you're seeing there is our gradual removal of it, and this has happened within the last fortnight. If we could carry on, please. I should add that we will replant in that location, and we're already as a team discussing what would be a suitable plant to go into that spot for future enjoyment and use for visitors, and to augment the botanic collection at the same time. You're looking at peat beds there immediately on the right hand side. There's plans to revamp that area in the future as well. And in a moment we will move around to our left, a pathway that we've put in within the last 9 years. Previously the vegetation here was a dense canopy of various species of tree, holly being the dominant species, Ilex aquifolium. But we put this path in leading to a pond that was put in the 1960s. I had the pleasure of meeting a visitor some years ago who was one of the original installers of this pond, a double concrete set of pre-molded prefab ponds that were sunken into the ground. This pond at the moment has more vegetation than visible water. I try and get in there each autumn with one of my team members to cut out a lot of the vegetation and allow more water to be visible, while also allowing more plants to grow back for the future growing season. We'll get in this autumn and carry on with this. With COVID last year, we had little opportunity to do so. The plants you see with the what appear to be leaf spikes coming up through the water are known as floating soldiers. That's one of the common names. A fascinating plant that reacts well to warmer air temperature and light levels, and it comes up to the surface during the growing season to flower. As the temperatures drop, as light levels drop come autumn and winter, so it submerges, it sinks back down below the water line until the following season. A fascinating adaptation. If we can just carry on, you'll see the density of growth in the pond here, and you'll also see my steel toe boots, an unintentional part of the filming, but I wasn't aware at the time that I had the camera positioned so low. The stakes and rope, we use manila rope throughout the garden for various features. It's aesthetically pleasing, it's a natural product. It lasts about 2 years in our climate here, and then we replace it. But rope and stakes, all part of the safety around pond systems. You're seeing further rope and stakes here. This is to demarcate our 7-circuit 9-meter diameter classical labyrinth. It takes 3.5 minutes to walk into the center, and while it's a charming feature year round, the raised grass there has over 4,000 crocus bulbs that come up late winter, very early spring, to remind us of longer days beckoning. It's always a treat to see that in the opening months of each new year. Another raised bed here. This was put in by our volunteers, a 7-sided raised bed and seating area, framing another dead tree, but one that is on this occasion deliberately recognized for what it is, what it was. There are now cables running through it, allowing climbers to go climb up, and we hope in the next 3 to 5 years to have them cascading down over those architectural branches you saw a moment ago. The position of this tree and its extraordinary growth is too good, was too good to have failed to ground level. Sadly, it too was killed off by a different disease, not fire blight, but Dutch elm disease. This is a disease, fungal disease, that has very sadly, I don't think it's too strong a word to say, annihilated the elm tree population across Britain in the 1960s, particularly through to the 1980s in England. The English elm, Ulmus procera, was very badly killed off, predominantly knocked out of the UK countryside. Through phytosanitation and climate, it's taken many more decades for Dutch elm disease to reach Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire, but very sadly it's now here, has been in a significant manner for about 15 years, and it is gradually travelling west across Scotland. We have, I can think of at least 2 more good mature elms in our collection that are still alive, but very sadly, and I'll highlight them in today's tour, but very sadly in the next couple of years I anticipate they too will be hit by Dutch elm disease, and we will tragically have to have them removed. This tree was a Camperdown elm, grafted to have wonderful pendulous contorted growth, and as indicated, the remnants is there, but it tells a story in its own right. You're looking here at our southern edge of plantings that take you down into the sunken garden, but you're moving around, about to look south. We know this as the beech lawn with the wonderful copper beech there, and other associated plants that predominantly trees, but by no means solely, that help frame this really rather lovely and beautiful lawn space. The bed underneath the copper beech here is new. This is something that my team put in within the last 9 months. We've underplanted with a lot of shade-tolerant species that are both bulb and herbaceous combined. It's in its infancy. It will continue to look better in the years to come. But this was a very deliberate use of the lawn area under the beech to try and reduce our overall workload, while at the same time maximize the opportunity to extend our plant collection. Beech trees, by their very nature, have evolved to have a shallow root system, so they're very good at taking up the first rainfall that arrives. That reduces competition of plants growing around them. But equally, and you can do this if you have a northern hemisphere beech to walk underneath and enjoy, look up into the canopy and you'll see that each leaf overlaps the other by a very small amount. Ultimately, the result is a dense shade canopy underneath the tree, again reducing potential competition. In the context of what you see there, it means a drier soil, a shallower volume of soil available to underplant in. And what we did was bring in leaf mulch and topsoil to try and raise the soil ever so slightly, plant into that, have less lawn to mow that was never growing very well, and create that visual display that we've just passed. As we carry on through this lawn, you will see in front of you, and you'll get a different view of this shortly, another beech. It's a pendulous beech, Fagus sylvatica pendula, but you can see as we look up into the canopy there, the extraordinary horizontal limbs that are also produced by this tree, and then the pendulous growth to go with it. This video doesn't give credit, visual credit, to the stunning size and shape and form of that tree. It's very beautiful, and if you have the chance to visit this garden, please come into the southern section and admire the tree in its full capacity. It looks just as stunning in the winter months once the leaves have dropped and you get to see the full architectural effect of the branch system at the same time. Southern wall here is the wall running along St Maca Drive, highlighted that in the map in the original image, and quite a few of the tree and shrub plantings along this wall inherited are very fine, but tragically of the rose family, and we have lost a few plants in here in the last 4 years, again from fire blight. We are gradually replanting where we can. As we look through the path here, so it takes us back, you're now looking east, it takes you back onto the lawn where the labyrinth was, the so-called labyrinth lawn. But the major tree in front of you here, slightly to your left, is a lime tree. Atilia is the genus, not lime as in producing citrus, but commonly lime tree. Different genus, different family altogether. You're seeing some of the pendulous beech there again as well. That lime tree had some major limbs growing out over the path. We've recently taken some of those off to augment light levels. We've now turned 180 degrees, just walking underneath another lime tree where we'd like to raise the crown, through the yew hedge here, and we are into the rose garden. The house you see in the southwest corner there is university property, in fact formerly owned by the Cruickshank Garden Trust, part of the original bequeathment by Anne Cruickshank in 1898 to create this botanic garden for the university. Part of the Cruickshank building, the granite section of the Cruickshank building was part of the bequeathment. This house and the southern property, the original 7 acres of what is today 11, the land that was bought and given by Anne Cruickshank. The house there now rented out through the university to generally speaking, academic staff of the university or individual private professionals, which is the case at the moment. I always say they have the best backyard in Aberdeen. The house itself is very interesting. The Cruickshank building prior to purchase was a grammar boys' school, and the boys, if they suffered from tuberculosis, moved across the property. It wasn't a garden at that stage, it was playing fields, to this house to recover. And the design of the house is 2-story wide hallways, large bedrooms, and the big windows, as you see the sash windows there, to get maximum ventilation. And that was all part of the treatment of tuberculosis of the time. In a moment we'll pivot round to our right and you'll be able to look through into the rose collection. There's numerous ways and techniques of showcasing the different growth habits of roses. Some are ramblers, some are climbers, some are creeping roses, some are shrubs, shrub roses, etc. What you're seeing here are the use of ropes to help tie in the climbing and rambling roses. It's very effective. And as we're looking through, we're looking north, but as we're looking through, you'll see the sunken element of the rose garden there. This was done by my predecessors in the 1980s to deliberately dig down, create 2 levels, indeed to create the whole rose garden display itself, and tell the history of the rose. Since my curatorship from 2012, when I first arrived, we have changed the focus of plant material in the base of the sunken garden, of the rose garden here, and in the sunken area, removed the roses. Any roses that were in the base have been moved up to the top level, and we now have a display of flora in the lower section, highlighting, focusing on plants for medicinal use. And while interpretation and our collection in there needs to be perpetuated, and it certainly will be, it's a very interesting, I think, little collection to add to the botanic collection as a whole. Because while this may be the 3rd oldest university in Scotland and the 5th oldest in the UK, founded, as you're all aware, in 1495, within 2 years of that founding, we are the first university to have created a faculty of medicine. I find that a very salutary, very pleasing, but quite extraordinary fact that the eminent universities of considerable age, Cambridge and Oxford, had not got round to doing that. Of course, to this day, the University of Aberdeen, and indeed the city of Aberdeen, has a very rich history in medicine. And so to offer a small herbal in this botanic garden to talk about plants for medicinal use is highly appropriate. And in fact, in our archives, we have a Professor Ogilvie of the 18th century stating that it was high time the university had a botanic garden, and one that was for herbal medicine and training. A few centuries have passed since that statement, but we do have that small display I've highlighted. Again, if you visit, do come and see it. And so we move through the rest of the rose garden here. The top 4 beds here when I first arrived were 2 beds, both of them C-shaped. And again, harking back to what I've mentioned earlier, being able to augment our botanic collection but have less open beds to maintain is a vital element for the staff size, the staff complement of the botanic garden. This garden was designed around a curator, a head gardener, and 8 full-time gardeners. That changed in the early 1980s. I inherited, of course continued to have a superb team, but I inherited a head gardener and 2.5 full-time gardeners. I'm delighted to tell you the workforce has not dropped below that. In fact, it has increased. We now have a seasonal traineeship, very kindly financially sponsored through the Friends of Cruickshank Botanic Garden. We also have a horticultural apprentice, which is superb, and notable increase in the number of volunteers. The volunteers at the moment are not in action, they're not with us because of COVID-19. I sincerely hope that we can bring our volunteers back within the next couple of months. They are chomping at the bit to return, which is charming. We in turn are very keen to have their involvement once again. So having left the rose garden, we pivot round, and this looks down to the back entrance for the private owners in the house that I've highlighted. More importantly, you see here a series of honeybee hives. These are research beehives. We have in the zoology building some key academic researchers working on specifically a mite that has a significant impact on commercial honeybee production around the world. The mite is called the Varroa destructor. I think the Latin name of that mite suggests exactly how damaging it is. the mites adhere themselves to both the worker bees but also the larvae, or have the potential to do so to the larvae, having a significant impact on the health of a honeybee colony. So when I first arrived, while the research was being carried out, there were no hives in the garden. That seemed an oversight, and I promptly encouraged hives to be brought into the garden, and that research and the action you see here is progressive and continues. Interestingly enough, within the last month, we've had two swarms of beehives in the garden, and those who maintain the hives have come out and collected them and benefited from that. You're looking here into a canopy of two species, and slightly off to your right is a Norway Maple, but behind is the canopy of one of our two remaining elm trees and the Scotch elm, Ulmus glabra. And the canopy, I think you'll agree at the moment, is reasonably thick. You can see some daylight through it, but gradual loss of the canopy, the density of it, is one of the opening scenes or opening signs of Dutch elm disease. We will have to keep monitoring this tree. It could be that Dutch elm disease impacts this tree over the next 8 months or so, through the winter months, and we find in spring the canopy is heavily reduced. That tree may well survive quite a few more years. We will have to see. As we make our way down the pathway, we come across a shrub on your left there. That is a golden chain tree, but it is the Scotch Golden Elm, smaller, more prostrate, but lovely in its own right. You're looking here into a canopy of an ash tree. We have a number of ash along this western flank. Tragically, ash dieback is marching across Britain. In the last fortnight, have seen a lot of ash dieback within the Falkirk Basin of Scotland, and on this occasion, geography of Aberdeenshire is not going to save us. When ash dieback was recognised as being in Britain in 2012, and an immediate embargo was put on the import of diseased commercial ash from Europe, where it's been in the population for over almost 30 years. It was established that diseased imported ash stock had been brought into Aberdeen and was being sold within our geographic basin. So very sadly, ash dieback is already here. There are signs of it in the city. That will have a major impact, not just across the British landscape, but our collection in due course. Again, we will have to manage that as best we can. So we are gradually making our way north as we look. We're on the western flank. Directly off to our left is the zoology building. The gate entrance there will go through imminently, but we're going to pivot round to the right, and you're looking down the herbaceous border. This is a stunning part of the botanic collection and visual display within the gardens. The main paved path there leads us, at the moment we're looking east, but it leads to the Cruickshank building, it leads to St Maca Drive and to the rest of the campus. But the 87 metre length herbaceous border here is double-sided. It's approximately 5 metres across, and so you can view it and enjoy it from both sides. It's a significant display and seasonally wonderful. You're having growth along this border now that far exceeds 2 metres. You can come in with a colleague, a friend, walk down one side, they walk down the other, and you may hear each other, but you won't see each other at this stage of the growing season. The stakes and net there are down the central main 3 metres of the bed, and that saved us an enormous amount of time, allowing the plants to grow up through the net for structural support. Previously, when I first arrived, team members used canes and string, and to do that along 87 metres was a good 10 days of work, and then having to remove it each autumn the same again. We've also put pathways through the herbaceous borders. You don't have to walk the full 87 metres now to be able to get to different sides, but the paths are invisible until you find them. So there's an element of surprise and I would like to think associated joy with doing so. And here we are about to turn left through one of the 2 pathways, immediately taking us through that 5 metre stretch onto the lawn at the north side of the herbaceous border, providing the dividing wall as a visual link, but also while we're looking north, it is of course a south aspect. So maximum solar gain and radiation along this wall, allowing us on this side to grow a lot of flora that is from warmer climes, not necessarily easily able to be grown at 57 degrees north without using a microclimate to our full advantage. But as we rotate around there, you can see the herbaceous border once again from the other side here. A series of different plants along the wall here, including a very wonderful strawberry tree. That's the structural frame, timberwork, stemwork you see there. Arbutus unido is the so-called strawberry tree. It does flower up here for us, but it's never fruited. And we're about to pass a bench that is again a wonderful spot just to sit and enjoy the view, but also very much a bench of contemplation for some. It's in memory of 5, 6 staff workers of the zoology building during its construction, who were tragically killed when there was an injury on site, an accident on site when it was built in the 1960s. We move through the pathway here. At the moment there are steps as we go through the gate. In due course that will change. This will become a ramp allowing easier access for buggy and wheelchair users. But right now we move through up the steps and into the central lawn and pond garden. Historically this was known as the rock garden, and my predecessors in the late 1960s, very early 1970s, put in an extraordinary rock garden. Stones were sourced of vast size and moved with a crane and swung into place, and the associated flora of a rock garden, alpines of various parts of the world brought in, including a very good Scottish collection. You'll remember that I've already said the original complement of 8 full-time gardeners was cut in half by the early 1980s down to 4. Well, that changed how the collection across the Botanic Garden could be managed, and it was a gradual decline at this point of the alpine collection. Alpines are generally low growing, slow growing, and while wonderful and highly evolved within their own within a global context, when it comes to managing them in a contrived rock garden setting, it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. They can easily be outcompeted, and so very sadly the alpine collection has for the most part gone away. What has been left is a very good collection of dwarf conifers, dwarf when they were put in, they've now grown to significant maturity, other trees, and an understory of other vegetation that we are now adding to. However, when I arrived, recognizing the rock garden was in name more than in fact, that is to say more rocks than alpines, I have changed the name of this central location of the Botanic Garden, the second third, to the Central Lawn and Pond Garden. It complements the Northern Arboretum, it complements the southern section we've walked through. It's very beautiful in its own right, but it's not a location anymore of significant alpines. You can see here trees of different hues, leaf color, size and age. We have a very beautiful mature native birch directly in front and now off to our left. We think it's a tree of about 120 years old, very significant for its age. In the wild, a tree probably wouldn't get to that age, perhaps half that age would be a good old tree in a wild context. The rather beautiful umbrella-shaped tree directly in front of you there is a cut-leaf Norway Maple. As we pivot around, so there's the trunk of the old birch. The pond system here has been revamped and to a certain extent unearthed by my team and wonderful volunteers in the last 24 months. The pond system was put in the 1960s as part of the original rock garden design. 5 different pools with cascading water. It's very beautiful in its own right, but again, a lot of plants are allowed to overgrow or over it or even into the concrete base. Much of that has been stripped back. We found some fascinating things. When I say things, I mean features. We've restored many of those. We've also reduced the size of some of the beds, again, less areas to maintain, but more specialized to augment our botanic collection. In the lower pond, we also, amazingly, disappointingly, found over 100 plant labels that had been thrown in over the years. So that to a certain extent explains why some of our collection is not as well labelled as we wished. This pond here, this middle pond, always has frog spawn, late winter, early spring. And while it never seems to last very long, the fact that there are frogs returning each year is proof that some do survive. The young tree there is a tulip tree, Liriodendron tulipifera, a bit of a mouthful. A fascinating, very beautiful plant in its own right from East Coast North America. That genus has only 2 species in the world. The other one is Liriodendron chinensis, found, as the name implies, in China. Extraordinary, only 2 species of that genus have survived through natural selection, evolution, of such vast geographic disparity. We don't have the Chinese form in the collection, Chinese species in the collection. It would be lovely to get that in the years to come. This is the western flank. This path was partially complete when I arrived in 2012. We've since made sure it comes all the way down to the lower level. We need to resurface it in due course, but as we make our way up, you'll see the large sycamore here and its trunk on the left. That ivy, we need to cut some more chunks from the lower stem to help make sure that there's some dieback of that ivy, not of the tree, just of the ivy, so that it doesn't continue to climb up through the canopy. It's a double-edged sword, that statement. Ivy flowers late in the season. It's brilliant for pollinators late in the growing season, September time. It also provides superb cover and winter cover protection for insects and other creatures. But the downside is that too much growth of ivy up into particularly deciduous trees results in the ivy being evergreen, the leaves, the trees themselves dropping their leaves in the winter, but giving the impression that the trees are still in full growth. And classically, winter storms mean that high winds and going through a tree that appears to be still in full leaf provides what's called a larger sail area, a larger surface area of potential storm damage. And so on this occasion, we do remove some of the ivy in our collection. You can see chunks that have been cut out there. There's no point cutting through a single stem of ivy and just leaving it, because it can refuse. You have to physically cut a chunk out. In our case, we tend to cut a chunk of about fist thickness. Continuing up the path here, it's a T-junction. If we were to turn right, we go back down the hill towards the nursery and behind the scenes area, the garden bothy space of facilities for the staff. We've turned left and right, and this top path takes us into the final third, the most northern section of the Botanic Garden. This is the Arboretum. It's a charming space in its own right. The last purchase of land by the university in the 1960s to bring the garden to its full complement, as I've already mentioned, of 11 acres, 4.5 hectares. What's fascinating about the Arboretum is what the land was used prior to purchase. It was a market garden. This is land of prior continuous cultivation. It was used to grow crops. I have very little information beyond that, sadly. Indeed, very few images of this area as a cultivated space. I don't know if the crops were grown and sold locally. I suspect that was part of the story, or whether they went further afield. We've immediately deviated slightly off to the right, having come through the gate. We're on the top slope here, and as we make our way down, you may catch a view of the double spires of St. Macca's Cathedral. When you come into the Arboretum at this level, you do get a wonderful view looking down, looking east to the double spires. Of course, St. Macca's Cathedral being the founding site of the university in 1495. The bench you see there is a recent generous donation by Claire Davidson and her siblings. Claire has just recently retired from the university, from the theology faculty department, but her father was Professor Gingingham. He held the post of professor or chair of botany. I believe he was the last to hold that post here at the university when it was still recognized. I had the huge pleasure of meeting Professor Gingingham when I first came to work here. very sadly died 2 years ago now. He was eminent in his field. The vast majority of his research was in heathland management, heathland restoration, and his work was very, very significant in helping create the Cairngorm National Park as we know it today. And so it's rather lovely to not only have his significant association to this university, to this botanic garden, but the fact that his children should feel the same and have very generously donated 2 benches to the botanic garden. One, as indicated, looking down this slope, our meadow collection here, where we have the paths cut through, and you can just make out one of those 2 spires on the horizon. So we're looking through to the northeastern section of the Arboretum there, immediately pivoting round, beginning to look north again. This is one of our Wellingtonias, a very fine tree in its own right, beginning to scream skyward. Its native habitat can be 100 meters high on the west coast of North America, so it has plenty of time and space to get to that height yet. But the Arboretum is deliberately managed to have a strong element of native flora growing through, particularly as understory, promoting biodiversity, augmenting principles of conservation, the pathways we cut through to allow for access and for ease of access. Certain parts of the Arboretum here have exposed roots from the volume of trees and their varied root depth. If roots are too exposed and or it gets too slippery or there's a trip hazard, what have you, then we change the pathways we cut in a different area, which gives us both flexibility and hopefully increased safety for visitor access. As we move here, so we're looking clearly at a large, to say collection of nettles is probably the wrong terminology, but we certainly let nettles grow up and through in various places. A species that was brought across, I suppose we can say 2,000 years ago now, by the Romans. They brought Attica dioica with them from Europe, recognizing its value as a food, recognizing its value, its fiber use for rope, clothing, what have you. Of course, it has biodiversity value as well for various species of insect, caterpillar, and subsequent butterfly as well. We're making our way to the western flank and then up to the top level in the Arboretum here. Gradually, this is where the tour will finish on this occasion. We're climbing up what is called Kettle Hill, and you can find this on maps of the 18th century of old Aberdeen, if not earlier. Kettle Hill, apparently, from what I've read and been told, has a fascinating history. The hill is broken here by the northern boundary. While it's a ha-ha and it looks like our property goes on forever, there is in fact a 10-foot drop into Tillydrone Road, a cobbled and very ancient road. How ancient, I don't know, because on the far side you enter Seaton Park and the hill without the cut-through continues, and I gather that I have been told that Kettle Hill was a site in ancient times of burning witches and no doubt warlocks. How true that is, I do not know. Today, it is where we have a significant birch collection, which we've added to, and I inherited this collection of European dwarf mountain pine, Pinus mugo. They have a habit of growing upwards and then, thinking that gravity is possibly a little too dominant, gradually collapsing. I knew when I first arrived that if we were able to clear out an element of this collection, it would create the most wonderful natural place for play and climbing for young children or adults at heart, so long as they don't go too high up. And to this day, that's exactly what this lovely little grove of pendulous trees has created. You may have noticed as we climb the hill off to the left from this scene that there were the tops of other pines coming up. There's a grove there of about a dozen Pinus mugo, the same species as you're seeing here, which in about 30 years' time will be the new play area. No doubt by that stage these pines will have very much had their own time of use and age. So hopefully we can maintain this as a play area and dominant space of fun and engagement in the northern section of the Arboretum. As we pivot around, you can see some of the birch. The view changes, of course, as the growth changes through the months. Normally you get a better view looking through. The logs there from trees that we felled in the area and now are positioned to be a lovely sitting area, meeting area for those who wish to come up and have their own picnics. And so that is where we finish today's tour.
Thank you very much, Mark. I thought that was really, really interesting, as always. It's always nice to hear you take us through a tour of the garden. So we'll now take any questions if anyone has any. I can see that the chat is quite quiet at the moment, but we can kind of give it a few minutes. Usually there's some questions for Mark. So, oh, thank you for joining us, Amanda. And she says, thank you, Mark, for a wonderful talk. And as always, thanks to Nicole Knight. So thank you.
If indeed, Chloe, there are people tapping away to try and get a question through to us, perhaps an opportune moment to be able to say that yesterday, late afternoon, we had in the Botanic Garden a wonderful delivery of a sculpture. This is one of 50, I believe, possibly 58 sculptures that are all lighthouses. They've been painted by key artists in different styles and broad range of different colours to be positioned not just across Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire, but to go up to Orkney and Shetland. So if you want the full set, you're going to have to travel a little further on this occasion. But they are going to be in situ until, I gather, middle of October. And they are ultimately to be auctioned off and are supporting Clan Cancer, the wonderful charity that helps patients suffering from or diagnosed with cancer. So I'm delighted that we have this charming, colourful sculptural piece in the garden. Again, for any visitors who wish to come and see it, to do so. I also had the privilege of meeting the artist who painted this sculpture, Lindsay Alderdice, this morning, and she was enchanted to see it in situ. So that's a new feature to the Botanic Garden, and one that you can enjoy for the next couple of months.
Thank you, Mark. We've just got a couple of kind of questions and comments now. So the first one says, that was a really interesting talk. Thank you. Would love to visit again. Hopefully you will be able to do so soon. Could you say a little bit more about ivy on trees, please?
Yes. I can certainly expand on what I briefly commented on. Heterohelix, as it's known, ivy, is a native to Northern Europe, native to Britain. It's I think, a very important plant in the British flora. We know that it's very much a plant of our own folklore. The holly and the ivy, all part of the Christmas scene. It plays a very important role in all sorts of ways, but within a biological and garden management context, there are sub-layers of necessary management that need to be considered. The first thing to say is that while there are many very beautiful different cultivars of ivy that we grow and in a commercial trade context and buy and use in private garden settings or public garden settings, the standard green native species is a woodland plant. You might even say a marginal woodland plant, so it will grow in areas that are slightly more open on the edge of forests, that can creep both along the ground and very successfully climb into the upper canopy of a given tree or even shrub. The ivy itself has evolved to do that. That's its way of being able to have a greater surface area to grow into when it flowers and sets seeds, so it's a more effective way of being able to spread itself. But it's evergreen, and that's the significant difficulty, potential difficulty, with regards to long-term management if you wish to have a healthy tree collection for a longer period than if you don't manage the ivy. Because ivy will grow up into your trees, particularly if they're deciduous trees, the leaves drop in the winter, and for a standard deciduous tree, with winter storms, winter wind, the wind blows through the branches, you don't have the same surface area, but with ivy you still do, and that's the concern. So if you're going to then try and chop down ivy, which is very difficult to do, to pull it out of the branches, you need to cut the stem, but you can't just do a normal cut that normally would go through. You need to cut out a chunk, and that's what we showed briefly in the video today. Right, that's a bit of a lengthy response, but I hope that helps.
Thank you. We just had another comment about thank you for the walk, much appreciated, a beautiful sight amidst the pandemic here. And then we had a question about does the garden look much different from this in winter? So Nicole and I have kind of shared, we did do a winter walk, so we've kind of put the links to that in the chat, just so people can see that for themselves and just make that comparison. But maybe you could kind of talk us through, Mark, some of the kind of, I don't know, the main changes that take place, or maybe the kind of changes that take place in the management, you know, during the kind of summer months and the winter months.
I can. The potential for a very lengthy answer to that question.
I don't think I've made that very simple for you, because it probably could go quite detailed there. But
I'll try and be as concise as I can. The first thing to say is that the botanic collection that my team and I have inherited is quite wonderful. We have roughly 3,500 different taxa, of which about 2,800 are plants at species level. So the remaining 700 odd are cultivars, varieties of plants. We are adding to that all the time, and that not only increases the overall number, to a certain extent it replaces lost specimens as well. With that in mind, so this is a botanic garden that has something in flower year round, so there is always something to see no matter the season. It's also worth noting that if you visit the botanic garden, you will find there are some glass houses visible, but those glass houses are for academic research purposes first and foremost. We don't have any public glass houses to extend our collection. We're so fortunate in Aberdeen to have wonderful parks, including on the River Dee, the Duthie Park, and the wonderful Winterbourne winter gardens there. The 2 acres of covered glass there, which complement what we grow here in the northern part of Aberdeen city. And they have wonderful plants under glass from the warm temperate subtropical, tropical regions of the world. The botanic collection here is only outdoor plants, only temperate flora. So whatever we use to increase, let's rephrase that, whatever plants we bring into the collection have to be able to survive our outdoor climate. The management, therefore, very briefly can be broken down into the growing season, which involves mowing, extensive mowing of our lawns. In our nursery, some of the stock plants are containerized, not all, some are open ground, but many are containerized. So there's a lot of work behind the scenes of potting up plants as well, and then watering them, vital to be able to maintain the hydration of those plants. It's fascinating to think that we're having a few good hot days this week once again. Apparently we're going to get similar conditions next week. We're verging on 10 weeks, not consecutive, but 10 weeks this summer of very dry conditions, and the collection, the main collection, is beginning to show a bit of drought stress now. Certainly behind the scenes, a lot of watering is required. In the winter months, as I've alluded to, for a different reason, with a lot of the trees having dropped their leaves, autumn involves certainly a lot of leaf collection, leaf pickup. We store those leaves, we use them, they rot down over 3 years, and in the third year we use them, the leaf mold, as a basis to make our own potting composts. But winter months is in many ways catching up on projects that we just didn't have the time to do during the height of the growing season. Trees that have dropped their leaves allow branch systems to be visible. We talk about dead, diseased, damaged, or crossing limbs. That's a time to try and clean up some of our trees or shrubs in that context. New beds to create, old beds to revamp. The herbaceous border that we highlighted today, some of those plants need to be dug up and split. That's an ongoing process. Springtime is a case of making sure that all of those winter projects are either being completed or are producing the growth that we want to then manage during the growing season. That's a very brief synopsis. All of that management and hard work done by my superb gardening team. I'm not sure if I've abbreviated 12 months in such a short period of time, Chloe.
I think you did a very good job, Mark, and I think it's quite nice to hear of all the work that kind of takes place in the background, because I think obviously when you walk through the gardens, you just get to enjoy the kind of beauty of them, probably not taking into consideration all the work that takes place behind the scenes to make them. So thank you. So our next one, there's a couple that are about the kind of cherry disease. So one person's asking what the name of the cherry disease is and is it spreading, and then kind of connected to that, will you be able to plant another cherry in the same place, or does the ground become exhausted as happens with Flora roses?
A nice question, an interesting question. I have a couple of ideas of what would be suitable to go into that location where that cherry presently is, because as per those who have asked the question, they're quite right in thinking that we will have to fell that tree in its entirety, and where we can dig out some of the root mass. That's a major job in its own right, but to give us the space to formally replant in there. I think it's important, considering the size of the tree when it was in full growth and its location, framing both buildings, that we put another tree back in that location. But we need to match that to ultimate width of growth, because we don't want the limbs to hit the building and then have to be pruned back unnecessarily. So a slightly more columnar, rounded tree, its habit, its final growth shape, is probably worth considering. What's also going to be important there is the underplanting. We want to maintain the present ground cover there, which is made up of a number of species, but this sounds rather crass, I don't mean it as such, it's rather green. And it would be lovely to have more colour there, particularly in late summer. And so, talking with Richard Walker, my head gardener, we've already considered for next year that we will grow behind the scenes various plants that we can use as almost plug plants. So when they're semi-mature, go into the understory there and drop them in so that they provide seasonal colour, and treat them as annuals and replace them year on year. Dahlias, while I know they are not annuals, they will be lifted and the tubers stored to overwinter. Dahlias are one thought we have. Digitalis, foxgloves might be another. Other plants we can plant as understory. As for being able to replant in that space, fire blight is, as I understand it from all of the scientific papers I've read and other papers on pest and disease, fire blight is not a disease that will be carried into the root system, and so that is beneficial. So even if we were not to dig out the root mass at the base, if that was just too much work and effort, the disease would no longer be there. It would not survive. So that's beneficial. But what we don't want to put back into the collection, very sadly at this stage, we don't want to put a woody tree or shrub of the rose family back into that location. What is perhaps much more worrying is that in the courtyard we have 3-4 very good plants of the rose family, and one of them is a very sizable, much larger than that tree we took out, sizable double flowering gean. And to lose that would be absolutely tragic. So that's really why we've taken immediate action on this cherry, having seen the damage and recognized the signs and symptoms of fire blight.
Thank you. I think that kind of rounds everything up nicely. We just had a couple of comments of people who remember Professor Charles Pressure.
Good.
So it's nice. It's always nice to kind of hear. I think we maybe had that before, that people obviously have memories of him. So that's really lovely for you guys to have shared that. Thank you. And I think if we don't have any more questions, that kind of takes us nicely to the hour. Just say thank you very much, as always, to Mark for filming and for taking us through the gardens today. If you've been following our series, obviously we've done a winter walk, we've done a spring walk, we've just done a summer walk. So that does mean that we will be doing a fourth to complete the series come autumn. So stay tuned for the next event. And yeah, thank you to you all for joining us this afternoon. Especially in the summer, when people are kind of busy and we're getting used to things opening up in the UK. It's nice to see people still attending our events. So thanks very much, and we'll see you again soon, hopefully.
Chloe, in turn, thank you so much.
No problem. And thanks to our colleague Nicole, who has kind of been behind the scenes, kind of leading the sort of video side of things. So thanks, Nicole, too. But yeah, I hope everyone else enjoys the rest of their day or their evening, maybe morning if anyone's joining us from the States. So thanks again, and we'll see you soon, hopefully. Bye.
Good gardening, everyone.